because we're all going to co-edit them together as we go through this presentation.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
All right, it is 9:30. I think we'll go ahead and begin. Some people may just keep joining as Kirsten begins today, but welcome to session number 2 of your conference today. I'm glad you all were able to read that schedule and follow those links, and you are in the correct session if you were in the Cultivating Passion and Purpose today. I'm going to go ahead and share the slides, a link to the slides today in a few minutes. Our presenter is Kirsten Pomerantz, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the entire thing over to her. So welcome.
All right. Thank you, Christy. And hello, welcome everyone. I am so happy to be here. Just a quick aside, I love Zoom. Am I crazy for saying that? I don't love it all the time for everything, but I love how intimate it is, right? We're not in the same space together, and yet you're here in my home office and I'm in your classrooms, and I love that. So welcome. I'm going to take over the screen so that I have my guidance to keep me going straight. And Christy will be posting in just a minute the link to this very same slideshow so that you will be able to add to it when I let you know. So hello, my name is Kirsten Pomerantz. I am a new faculty member with the University of Idaho. And so I do need to say that while I am an employee of the university, what I'm sharing, of course, does not necessarily represent the views of the University of Idaho. So my presentation today, as you know, you signed up for it, is entitled How Psychology Can Help Cultivate Compassion. And when I was thinking about what I could share with this presentation, with this, this conference, I was struggling. I was thinking. It was a Friday evening when I realized that in the middle of thinking, I was watching yet another psychology video on YouTube for like what was my free time. And so I've been digging into some of these ideas for well over 10 years now, but they're just they've been an aside to my practice of being a classroom teacher. And I just wanted to share some of these ideas with you. So from the description of this particular presentation, I had a couple questions or ideas that I posed in my description, right? And these really are my essential questions. We're going to first tackle what was my third question in the program brochure. What can we do to have more open hearts and truly open minds in our conversations with other adults? And then a question that's much on my mind, and I assume maybe it's at least a little on your minds, what is going on in our adult world with how polarized we are and how reactive we all are? I don't have all the ideas, I have one idea. So I will share that with you. And then how can we help heal the fragility that we're seeing in our young people today? And this is really kind of our Gen Zs, our 25 years old and younger, that is going to be the focus for that particular piece. All right, so as I have 3 essential questions, I also have 3 agenda items. One is that we'll start with our first principles, which is kind of our norms for this particular session, and hopefully some norms that you'll consider as you move forward. They're ones that I've really kind of adopted as my new kind of central principles when I work with people. And then that question, why do they vote that way? And then our fragile Gen Z. So it's not a hodgepodge. They are kind of related, but of course we're also going to make some jumps in terms of psychological ideas from those different components. Okay, so Christy, if you haven't shared yet, go ahead and share the link with everyone. And as you get that, make sure you open up the slides, and you can scoot the slides to this particular slide, which I think is like slide number 4 or 5 in the slide deck. Maybe if you guys can give me a thumbs up if I'm seeing folks that are getting their slides up, just so I know we're good. And of course, I only have a couple, but I'm seeing most of you guys are there. So what I'm going to do while you're getting those pulled up still, because I'm seeing at least a couple faces that look like you're working on it, is just describe what I want to do first. And what I want to do is give you guys a chance to talk with each other and share your visions of on your best days. What do you believe about your students, right? Because we all have those days where we forget what we believe. But on those best days, when you're being your best teacher self, what is it that you believe about your students? So we're going to put you into breakout rooms. You're going to have what, like 2 or 3? Is that what we had? You're going to have 2 or 3 folks that you're going to share the breakout room with. You'll be in groups from probably 1 to 6 or 7. You're going to find the slide, and I'm going to go forward to show you what I mean. The next slide in the slide deck would be group number 1. And then the next one would be group number 2. You can see I'm pointing at my screen, like you can see me point at my screen. So you're going to look for the group number that matches your group number. Okay. I'd like you to briefly introduce yourself, tell each other your names, and share 1 or 2 things that you believe about all your students. And so in the interest of time, while somebody is talking, somebody else please type. You don't have to get it all. It could be bullet points, something very simple to kind of capture your thoughts. What questions do you have? All right, Christy, if you will start the groups, you guys can jump into your groups, and you will have, 6 minutes to do this. And then there were 2.
Awesome. I'm hearing that if I join a room, it still does not record. So I'm wondering, which is fine, it's okay. But I'm wondering, do you want to join a room?
Not for this part. I was going to wait for the moral psychology piece, those moral foundations, because that one I assume people will have some questions as they're digging in that, maybe just some surface things that it would be helpful for me to be in for.
Awesome. And then also, so I can put you in a room, it will ask you to join and you don't have to join. So like, that's why I hesitated this time. I didn't send that invitation out because I don't want to confuse you. But next time, and you'll get the option. So
perfect. Yeah. And I've learned from co-teaching that, as a co-person on this, it's a little bit different how I can jump between rooms than when I own it. So yeah.
So let me know if you want me to change anything, and that's an easy change. Oh, we had a friend join us, so I will make sure.
Maybe I'll give her a quick send off as soon as she's in.
Yeah. There's like 4 minutes left in the room, so I'm wondering if you want to just brief her maybe in the beginning of what you've already discussed. Then she won't really be in a room this time.
Yeah. Hello, Tammy. Can you hear me? No. Or maybe your microphone's not on yet. Well, hello and welcome. If you're able to see me and hear me, welcome. I'm going to jump forward in the slides. Oh. I'm going to stop sharing for just a, oh, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, to see the progress, you have to be out of share screen. Yeah.
There we go. You're still able to see my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
But just not full screen.
Right. So did you get the chat that Tammy said she can't get her audio to work, but she can hear it on YouTube. So she does not have a mic, which is good to know. Thank you.
Yes.
Tammy, we'll just keep you where you are until all the rest of the friends from the session come back in about 2 minutes.
And maybe see if, Tammy, do you have access to the link to get to the slides? She might have come in after that, if you want to repost that link.
Okay.
And Tammy, if you want to, you can jump onto one of the slides that's being typed on, or it looks like you could jump to group number 8, which is the 12th slide, and you can add 1 or 2 things that you believe about your students on your best days. What do we care about with our students? One of the tricky things with this is when we're sharing our screen, the view of being able to see other people, I need two different monitors to do this better, because it always blocks some part of my presentation.
Are you on a PC or a Mac?
Mac.
Ooh, I don't know what it is on Mac, but I know like I can split my screens. So on my PC, I have the Windows picture and then my arrow. Maybe yours is a control something, an arrow, and then it splits it in 2. So you have 2 pictures on your one screen.
Oh. I don't know that I want to play with it right now, but I will play with that.
It is handy dandy to do. I should have asked you about that earlier. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, because I know how I can do it. Like if I'm not sharing screen, I can mess with like a bunch of the view, but
right. All these little technology things, right? All these teachers and educators, everybody really around the world is discovering.
Right.
Awesome.
Right.
They have about 30 seconds left in the room, and then it gave them a 15-second transition to come out.
Perfect.
Okay.
Welcome back, guys. Is that all the rooms, Christy? Fantastic. All right. Hello. Thank you, guys. What I'd like to do now for just another minute is to give you a chance to walk through the other rooms. And so I'm going to do that on my share, but feel free to kind of, if you want to have both and do your timing a little bit differently. I'm going to go back to back to our start. Go back to full. There we go. Oh, these are fantastic, you guys. Thank you all. All right, so with that intention and reminder, we're here gathered today, right, to think about our passion and our purpose. And I think having these moments to reflect on both our classroom practice as well as how that connects to what we feel and believe about ourselves and the world is so important. So the first thing that I want to share with you guys is Chloe Valderay's theory of enchantment. And I'm going to launch into it, and then I'm going to talk just a little bit about each piece of it. The first thing that she says in what is core principles to her that are both radical and yet pretty simple is that we need to remember to treat people like human beings, not political abstractions. And I know I'm dancing in this world. I just asked you to think about your classroom and your students. And the part of the reason is because I think with our students, especially when we're able to take a step back, this is our natural stance. We treat each of our students like a human being. We don't reduce them to abstractions. We often fight powerfully to keep from reducing them to abstractions. So in our day-to-day world, then the invitation that Chloe Valderay extends is to remember to do that with all of our fellow adult human beings. The next thing is that I want to remember, and I want to share with you this idea to remember to criticize, to uplift, and empower, never to tear down, never to destroy. And her third thought is to root everything that we do in love and compassion. What's interesting about Chloe Valderay is that some of where this is coming from is that she is one of those, one of the people in the States right now who is working on ways to help us bring things like anti-racism training or awareness into our schools and communities. And we know that that's a very conflict-ridden area right now. And one of her suggestions then is that if we're going to move forward with educating each other as adults and our classrooms, that remembering these norms, remembering that people are people first, abstractions can be useful, right? When we group people into certain groups, they can be useful, but they are not the real human being, right? And that when we are talking with others, even when we disagree with them, we want to remember that we are trying to come to some sort of understanding where we both are not licking our wounds afterwards, right? That we are criticizing to uplift and empower, not to tear down, not to destroy. And then that rooting things in love and compassion is so essential and can get hard fast in our busy world. Chloe Valderay says that we become enchanted when we see ourselves and our potential reflected in something. Her theory of enchantment is grounded then, that when we're trying to teach something new, when we're trying to bring ourselves to a new awareness of something that maybe we hadn't considered before, that to be convinced of something, the first thing we have to do is to see our potential. We have to see ourselves in the thing. And so we really are thinking a little bit about things like multicultural education, teaching all learners, reaching out to all of our students for whatever the needs are that they have. And so that conversation is fraught with lots of landmines and lots of misunderstandings between adults in our world. And our way through has to be through a place of centered, grounded love for one another. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to be playing any videos, and videos when we're in our Zooms can be challenging with just the way that the playback works. So you now have access, and you will continue to have access to these slides. After today, you won't have editable access, but you will have link and follow through access. And so what I've done throughout these slides is I've embedded some links to further content so that you can see these people and their ideas a little bit more deeply and on your own time. So one of the first things then that you could access is Chloe Valderay herself speaking about her theory of enchantment and how she came about it, as well as what she's doing with it. She's super exciting. She's under 30. So just one of those, I love finding our young voices in our world and our communities that are helping to push our envelope forward in a way that, just like when I'm working with my, when I worked with my high school students, with my younger students, you just get that sense of, we're going to keep moving in a good direction. And so she's one of those folks that if you haven't heard of her, and I don't think she's very much on many people's radar yet, check her out and see what you think. Along those lines, I also have a Loving Connectedness YouTube playlist that is not definitive. It is just my kind of gathering of some people whose voices I'm liking to hear when I feel like I need to kind of ground in that radical centered place where I'm not just being a keyboard warrior on the social media sites, right? And remembering what my purpose is when I'm working with other human beings. Oops, and then I went and clicked on her. There we go, okay. And now I'm going the wrong way. I'm gonna go back out before I go too far. Okay, I am there. Sorry, guys.
Happens to the best of us.
Right? I know. Oh my gosh. When I was interviewing for my university position, it happened to me in the middle of my interview, and that was almost devastating. But I got to show that I was able to breathe and get through it, right? Because yeah, it happens, right? Our tech issues are inevitable. All right. So this is, I think, the core thing. Chloe Valderay is amazing. I want to sit with her and remember her. But this question, I don't know how many times you've said this in the last year. Why are they voting that way? Whoever it is, whatever the political position is, right, that you're coming from, why are they voting against their best interests? Why are they voting in such an irrational way, right? Whoever they is, if we haven't said it, we've heard somebody else say it. And this takes us then to Jonathan Haidt, who I'll have some slides about him a little bit further along. But this is research work by Jonathan Haidt. And this particular quiz is to rate your morals. You're not going to do that today, or at least not during this session. But you do have the link to that site right here. And that website was built easily 10 to 15 years ago. It might be a little more than that. So it will look antique. The way that it's laid out, the way that the buttons move, everything is definitely very old school tech as far as the presentation. I did want to share, and you can see, I'm not going to read this to you, but the particular website is a collection of psychologists, professors, and of course the grad students that are doing a bunch of research and work as well. These quizzes are all connected to research that either had been being done, or some of it is longitudinal and is continuing to be done. I won't say anything more about the research aspect of it, except for to say then that the Rate Your Morals quiz has been up for, like I was saying, 10 to 15 years at least. So a lot of people have kind of answered the questions and have been aggregated into the statistics of what gets presented that I'm going to show you here in a moment. Is there anything else I want to say about that? I don't think so. So when you go through this particular quiz, this Rate Your Morals quiz, what you end with is this graph that gets thrown up for you. And I'm going into the weeds here first, and then I'm going to kind of pull back out a little bit. So I have the end here, and you can see that the graph is presented in a couple different colors, right? As you might expect, red is for those of us that have identified as somewhat to extremely conservative. Blue would be somewhat to extremely, so moderate to a lot liberal. And then green is you. So this is me, warts and all. Green is me here. And so you would have your own particular set of responses in here, but then these, the blue and the red, will be pretty much stable for everybody, because this is that aggregated, however many people have done this quiz for decades, particular thing. Okay, so the way that we're looking at this graph is there are 5, what he has identified as moral foundations, that we then can look at how folks have self-identified politically, and then how they've answered the series of questions around these foundations. And the foundations are harm or care, right? So they're often on kind of this scale from harm to care, fairness to unfair, loyalty, like loyalty to your group, to your in-group, authority, and then purity. And as you can see in this chart, what Jonathan Haidt found through this and other research, right? This would not be the definitive piece that allowed him to say, yes, this is a working hypothesis. There was certainly more controlled stuff in it as well. But what we can see then is that for those of us who identify as somewhat to very conservative, all 5 of these moral foundations are pretty much equally important to us, right? So harm, fairness, loyalty, authority, and purity all have kind of equal emotional weight for us if we are identifying as conservative. Alternately, for those of us that are identifying as more liberal, somewhat to a lot, we can see that there is a very different trend here for us, right? Harm, so harm versus care, and fairness are a little bit higher and significantly higher than our interest in loyalty to in-groups, authority, and purity. So a very interesting trend. And then of course you can see mine. And so my cards are a little on the table. I don't remember when I took this particular quiz. It won't let you redo it over time. You have to come up with a new email. But this has been consistent. I've done this a couple times, and I haven't been interested in gaming it to see how I could like not be me. But this has been super helpful for me to think about who I identify with when, and who I simply, in certain instances, don't understand super well. And that's crucial to me in the world, to be kind of looking into the mystery that is other people's thinking. The other thing that I want to say before we dig into a little bit more about these questions then is that what this really is grounded in is this idea that you've maybe had this experience where you're talking with somebody and you want to help change their mind about something political, right? And we want to do this for all sorts of great reasons, right? Because we know that we're coming from the right place and they just don't understand, whoever that is, right? Whatever the circumstance is. And what Jonathan Haidt and other moral psychologists have found is that we think we're thinking creatures, but we seem to be more powerfully driven from what I like to think of as our gut reaction, our gut feeling, which is grounded often. It can be in these 4 domains of harm, fairness, loyalty, and authority. But one of the things that drives us a lot and is hard for us to access intellectually is our sense of disgust or appreciation for things. And we'll look at the types of questions that means, and that might help a little bit, because this is a different way of thinking about political schisms in our society, in our world. Okay, so what we're going to look at next is the types of questions that are on this quiz. And I have at the top our 5 foundations, right? We have harm, fairness, loyalty, authority, and purity. And I'd like you in the chat to look at these statements and say which of the 5 moral foundations you think these questions are circling around. I'm seeing fairness. I think you guys are on to something. Yep, fairness for this one. Yeah, and I think it's helpful to see the questions just to kind of get a sense of what that might mean in the world. Some of these are easier to kind of wrap our heads around than others. Let's look at the next one. Whether or not someone acted in a way that God would approve of, whether or not someone showed a lack of respect for authority. Respect for authority is something that all children need. What do we think? Type in the chat. Seeing a lot of authority. Let's see. Yep, very good, guys. All right, next one. Good. Yeah, lots of purity. And purity is interesting. I think that this captures some of the things that we can have senses of disgust or approval for, right? Certainly when we think about sensuality and sexuality, it can be sometimes like how we feel about, like, say, touching a dead squirrel, right? Also, purity could be things like our food, right? Do we have a gut reaction to the idea of organic food versus genetically modified food, right? So this I think is a little bit of a broader category than what in this quiz Height was capturing, because there's a lot of things that we can feel strongly about in terms of purity. But these give us a great example of that. And then, how about this one? What do we think? Harm. Yep. Good, guys. And last one. Good. Yep. Loyalty. All right. So because we're just enough people in here that I of course would love to discuss and have a big group discussion, but I think it will be more comfortable and easier to have some group level discussions about this. So same activity again, you're going to be put into the same groups you were in last time. You're going to find the slide that has your group number, and then spend a little bit of time kind of just like talking and puzzling. I want you to talk about your thoughts. What does this raise? Like, what kind of ideas or ahas does this kind of reveal to you? And then what additional questions might you have about the 5 moral foundations? And same idea, if somebody's talking, maybe somebody else can be capturing ideas while they're talking. doesn't have to be comprehensive, right? You're not having to do secretarial note taking. You capture the gist. And absolutely, if you're talking about something that you don't want put onto the slide, you absolutely can choose to not write something down, right? I recognize that in entering this particular topic, this is more or less what I feel is the heart of the beast of what is hard about talking with other adults today, how quickly we can step on some of these landmines. But I hope that this offers an idea about how some of the things that maybe we walk into with each other that result in some conflict might not be as unresolvable as we think if we kind of get to some of our more core and gut reactions as opposed to the words we're using. Okay, so with that, I'm going to say, what questions do you have? And I'm practicing my wait time just in case. Okay, so you're going to go into your groups. You're going to have about 10 minutes. I want to give you more time. I'm going to try to kind of like pop into your groups. So if you have clarifying questions, I'm happy to answer. I mostly just want to be there for that. You might be able to guess that I have a lot to say about moral foundations and Jonathan Haidt. So I would love to go into deeper discussions about stuff with people, but mostly my role in jumping through groups will be just to like answer any clarifying questions. And then later we can discuss because there's a lot to do. All right, Christy, will you go ahead and launch groups? You'll have about 10 minutes and then we'll bring you guys back. I'm going to unshare for right now, I think.
I'm getting you there, Erin. Sorry. Thank you for being so patient. That should work.
Nice. Thank you. All right, and I'm going to jump into rooms. It looks like I can just jump into the rooms.
Perfect.
So,
and if, Kirsten, just to let you know, if 10 minutes is too long or whatever you're feeling, we can stop them at any time.
Perfect. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I have the feeling it'll be too short.
Might be.
But we'll see. We'll see. Yep.
Awesome. Good discussions.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, the last group I jumped into was actually puzzled, and so that was good to help.
Nice.
And I'm going. How much time? Let me look at
So
time.
if you go till, you have until 10:45 and you're at about 10:15, so 30, a little less than 30 minutes.
Okay.
We
Yeah.
want to save 25 minutes so you can close out and ask for questions maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. You feeling good?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
Yeah,
You should-
I did a practice recording this morning where I was kind of like running through it, and I got about 30 minutes in. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to get ready for the actual thing. But it's just interesting to me how different like what I said was right then versus what came out
Right.
now.
That spur of the moment. What is in
Yeah.
your brain? What's going to come out of your mouth, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that really helps us to empathize with some of our students and our kids as we think about, oh, what are they telling me?
Right? Yes.
Yeah. What was the meaning behind the words that came out versus what their thinking really was? Because we want to presume positive.
Right. Right.
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally the same.
Mm,
And it looks like, yeah, we had many fewer than,
yeah, interesting.
which is fine because, yeah, then it's just bigger groups.
And you never know. I think that's how it goes across the board in any realm of conference webinar.
Yeah.
Okay, here they come.
Yep. Hello, everyone. So we're all coming back in. Oh, lots of stuff. I think I'm going to go off script here and ask each group if you'd like to share a couple thoughts now. What maybe some of the stuff that you talked about, or some ideas or some questions. You don't have to read through your whole slide, and you can also pass if because I know as opening up this for discussion means that guaranteed if there's two of us in a discussion, we probably have very different views, and if there's 20 of us, one of the groups brought up the question of how do I put this into practice? Like, let's say I have a colleague that that we're running into this conflict with, and you would think I would have thought about that particular question in the nature of this presentation, but I didn't. So I'd like to use that lens because that is kind of ultimately the lens. I think we know how to do some of this, like getting along with kids in our classrooms, usually much better than we can with adults, because we put on that best human hat with the students, the vulnerable students that we work with, and then we forget some of those tools with adults for lots of reasons. And so let's go to group number 1, and I guess I'll go to trying to decide if I want to go big screen. I'm going to go big screen. There we go. Group number 1. Do you want to, somebody want to share a couple thoughts from your discussion?
We talked about a lot of things, but mostly we talked about how we were curious to see where we would rate on the survey. And then we kind of talked about where we're from and what places we've lived, because knowing like regions where people live in, where they helps you know like where they're coming from. And then we talked mostly about how students like clash with different opinions. And so we talked about classroom norms and like building a community to honor and respect all opinions, and just teaching students to that they have the ownership of their own ideas, but they also have to allow other people to have different ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that ability to like embrace viewpoint diversity in any space is so hard. And yeah, bringing it to our classrooms is our biggest goal. I think that's certainly the first thing that we want to think about is like, how do we do this? How do we put this into practice? Good, thank you. Group number 2.
So we talked about I feel like the biggest thing we talked about was talking about the different backgrounds and where you come from, and how, after you popped in, we talked about how your lived experience and the language you use can cause people to become really defensive. We mostly talked about that a couple of us, basically where we grew up versus where we are now was a very different situation for all of us. And you have to adjust and be flexible.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah. I think that having another tool that we can use to reflect on kind of ourselves and our place in the world is so helpful and important. Group number 3.
I can go ahead. Forgive me for not turning on my camera. So when we first started our discussion, we were kind of thinking on whether or not we wanted to talk about morals between us as adults, or how we present those in our own classrooms. And so it was determined, of course, that these discussions are always a slippery slope, whether you're talking with colleagues or students or parents even. And that particularly as our students get older, and we're trying to model these morals in our classroom, there's a lot of competition for what we're trying to teach them, and especially with what they see in the media and social media, similar to group 2 and 3, just kind of regional impacts of what students are learning at home, hearing at home. Also, just similar to what I just said, there can be some pushback as to which morals are a bigger priority for each student. And then, of course, no matter the differences, it's really important for us to show our students that people can have different opinions than you, and we can practice acceptance and understanding.
Nice. Yeah, very thoroughly thought through. And it is, I think a slippery slope is a great way to say that, right? We know we there's things that we stay away from because there's no way through it. And I would say that this particular model and the idea of the moral foundations wouldn't be a thing that I certainly would tackle explicitly in most of my classrooms, because I don't think that it would be in my mind productive with most of the students. But there certainly could be, especially at our older grades, places where like explicitly having some of these conversations could be helpful. But yeah, thank you. Group 4.
I can go. We had a lot of questions, but I think probably the thing that stuck out to me the most is that when you're teaching, it can be, like the previous group said, it can be a little bit slippery talking about morals. So, but you also don't want to, you want to maybe try and keep what you believe separate from what you're teaching, and be respectful that other people have different views. And Haley in my group said that she's really upfront about that, because I said, well, how do you do that? How do you manage that? And she said that she's upfront and just voices her beliefs so that her students can think critically about it and form their own opinions. And yeah, that's our biggest takeaway.
Yeah. And that is right. That's like one of the $1 million questions then, right? Because we don't want to tell students how to believe. And so then how do we do that in a way that we're, being emotionally honest, right? Because like the way that I handle students doing the Pledge of Allegiance can be if we're talking about loyalty and respect for authority, right? That can be demonstrated by, I might be casual about expecting everybody to stand or whatever it is, right? I'm thinking of older students, especially where there's a little bit more chaos in that sort of process, and you have more students coming through a classroom. But that can communicate a lot to students just in terms of how I implement certain procedures in the classroom, and being aware of how that connects to like my own beliefs is so important. So yeah, I love you guys' thinking. What you're thinking about is the sort of things that I hoped that this would kind of open up. A lot of questions and maybe some ideas, and hopefully stuff to kind of continue to think about over time. Group 5.
I'll share. Did a lot of talking, so thank you to my group.
Mhm.
I think the main thing we talked about was questioning the model itself, and the words that they were using. Like harm was like really a little bit off-putting. It was like, oh, they're actually talking about like care. Like it was a little bit like, oh, and then purity, and how it seems very tied to religion. So.
Yeah, good questions, and I always love a good pushback on models. And that's certainly, as I was looking at this, I had some of those same questions because I haven't looked at the questions in a little while, because I use the 5 foundations operationally in conversations with my husband a lot. He's sick of it. Because he'll express puzzlement about somebody politically, and I'll say, remember those foundations, and he'll say, yeah, but otherwise, why is he doing that? I'm like, no, those really, but you're right. And I think your group was the one that I was listening in on, right? The purity, the theory of queerness, right? Those issues were not as much in kind of the common, they just weren't part of our political football as much 20 years ago as they are now. So yeah, I would say surely either if he hasn't updated this and is still using it, that would be a shame. I think that this was part of an earlier research project that he's no longer like conducting research on this. The questions just kind of stay up because they're just there. But yeah, good points, because they don't necessarily get at the heart of some of what we're feeling conflicted about today. But I think point a direction. Yeah, thank you. And group number 6.
I guess I can go ahead and share. We didn't get a lot down on our slide because we were just mostly talking, which I think is good. Yeah, we talked about, we never really heard about anything like this before, but as I was going back and referencing some of the questions, I was like, oh, some of those seem pretty targeted, like easily identifiable, like some of the vocabulary could be easily tied to conservative values or liberal values. Mostly it seemed like conservative values. We hit on some of the stuff like that the last group talked about, like about purity. And I spent a little bit of time analyzing the graph as well and noticing where the biggest discrepancies were. And one of those biggest things was the number of self-identified conservatives versus liberals that took that quiz. Significantly more liberals than conservatives had taken that quiz. And we didn't talk much about how to apply it in the classroom, but we were just talking. It was good.
Nice. Yeah. And this definitely is something that that I wasn't, as I was thinking about this, as I was preparing this presentation, I wasn't thinking so much of on the ground classroom praxis as how do we kind of like live some of these principles that we automatically do in our classroom. And I think that one of the things that we do is we take a step back from our reaction to people reacting to some of this stuff.
We said, I think she's just trying to get us to talk about this, and then she's going to tell us to be nice to each other.
Right. Yes. If only it was that easy. I just this week got into another, like just the words that I said something about I could have said systemic racism, but it was systemic something. And the older gentleman that I was in conversation with kind of like did this thing, and he said, oh, really? And there we were in it. But we had a great conversation because I was trying to remember to be good and to be nice. And that I really am trying to understand this person that's a puzzle to me, that has just this whole different lived experience. Okay, and I won't continue on that. All right, and I have a couple of blank slides. There we go. Let's take a moment, because that was a lot of group talking, us sharing. Just a silent moment. You can turn off your cameras, and if you have a notepad where you're taking notes, making notes, You can do that. You can stare off into space, open eyes, closed eyes. I don't care, right? But let's take a 1 minute reflection just to kind of process that. Okay. And we'll continue on to part 3 of my 3-part plan here. All right. So Chloe Valderay, Theory of Enchantment, Jonathan Haidt, 5 Moral Foundations. And we're going to stick with Jonathan Haidt because I actually got to meet him on Zoom earlier this week, which was like a first. And I got to tell him I've been nerding out on him for like over 10 years, which was super cool. So he started off his research in the area of moral psychology and the interest in really paying attention to this idea of disgust and kind of like what drives us from our gut. And he's continued on with a variety of different kinds of moral psychology and social psychology research. In the last 10 years, universities about 7-8 years ago had a very different student experience start to happen on campuses. And I'm brand new to university world. So for me, it was what I saw in the news. And what this chart shows us is this idea that, and this is not one of his charts. I didn't go and grab any of his graphs, but this one is wonderfully representative of the same kind of stuff that he's talking about. With our age groups, right? So our oldest age group is in the darkest color, so 65 plus. This is showing individuals who've reported major depressive episodes in the past year by age group. So our oldest adults, right, 65 plus, seem to be pretty steady, right? There was a little jump in 2012. Some of our, other groups, right, also a little bit of a jump right around 2012, right? So there's something that kind of changed socially, collectively, maybe around then. But what is the most interesting thing is if we're looking at our youngest groups, right, these palest numbers, in the last few years, our younger groups have shown in lots of different studies, lots of different measures, that there has been a significant uptick in mental health, anxiety, depression. Now, what this graph doesn't do that I have seen with some of Haidt's research is if we were to disambiguate this for girls versus boys, our young ladies, our adolescent females have skyrocketed. Boys have actually seemed to have held more steady, more like this. There has been an uptick, but nowhere near the same. In the last couple of years, our I think it's like 10 to 20-year-old girls have shot up significantly. So this is actually moderated because it's kind of not separating the genders. So that's interesting, right? And I'm sure that most of your schools, K-12 plus university, we've all seen this. We've seen increased needs to look at, in the Coeur d'Alene area, we've taken on programs like Sources of Strength. We've been doing the TBRI training, things that are meant to address social emotional needs of our students in our schools. And of course, like lots of other things, this is also a little bit of a political football as we talk about like, questions about why. So this video, if you watch nothing else from this slide deck later, I highly recommend watching Jonathan Haidt talk about this question. And he's specifically saying how overparenting has backfired on Americans. And at this moment, let's see, I'm going to go one more slide and see if that's the time. Yes, it is. Okay. So at this moment, I need to say I'm a parent. If we're talking about overparenting, I know that one of the things that one or more of you is going to feel is perhaps a little called out or questioned. And so I need to say I have an almost 18-year-old. He'll be 18 next week. I have two 16-year-olds. So I'm in the midst of this and don't want to have anybody feel like we're what I'm going to share feels like a blame game, because this is something bigger than any one of us. We're all a piece of this, but it's bigger. There's something socially that's shifted, and Haidt talks about this a lot. I'm not going to go into some of the social changes that have happened, but there is some additional background. But the most important thing is just take this for what it is, and you'll see as I go, it's not that big, but I do want to make sure you're not feeling like called out. Okay. All right. So Jonathan Haidt talks about that there are three terrible ideas that are floating around in society today around our young people that are kind of at the core of what we can point at as what might be destabilizing our students. I'm not a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. I'm a teacher. I've got my training in education. So I don't claim to like have that background research on this, but these things ring fairly true to me as well. And there are some actions that we can take away from this. So all that said. Oh, didn't do the first one. I'm going to have to click, click, click and not be fancy because I'm missing the most important one. There we go. Okay, so the three ideas are: children are fragile. That's problematic. If we think about our bones, if we think about our immune system, what we know about a lot of how we function as physical beings and with our physical bodies is that to build our bone density, we put them under stress a little bit, right? We do weight-bearing activity. To build our immune system, we put it under stress a little bit, right? And I say a little bit because of course we can break a bone. We can become desperately ill, right? There are things that can break us physically, and the same thing for children, right? But the really important thing to think about is that we know this as teachers, right? We're always trying to work in that zone of proximal development. That zone of proximal development recognizes that in order to learn, we're reaching for something else, right? We're moving just beyond our comfort to something new. And so then the same thing for children socially, emotionally. And one of the places that this plays out is thinking about how young are children allowed, like how young of children are allowed to go out in the world in some way. If we look at parenting from like the 70s, the 80s, the 70s and earlier, people will generally respond that they were let out of the house without supervision, 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old, and depending on where you are, that would vary a little bit. But if we move to our youngest, like college students today, then some of them are saying, 12 years old, they were allowed to be unsupervised out of the house, right? One of the presentations Haidt was doing, somebody called out, college was the first time they were allowed to be unsupervised, right? Probably not true exactly, but still, like we know that we're seeing very different patterns in that. And this is where, as a parent, we can feel kind of called out, because there's lots of reasons that we might not let our kid walk down the street or ride their bike someplace. My own 17-year-old has a job right now in Hayden, and I live in Coeur d'Alene, so it's about a 5-mile bike ride. And he's almost 18 years old, but I'm still like, oh, I hope he's going to be okay. Right. So I know that feeling as a parent of not necessarily feeling comfortable with him being in the world the same way that I was when I was that age, or like much younger. Okay. So first terrible idea, children are fragile. I'm going to try to, nope, I'm messing myself up. I like it better this way because then it shows it. So second terrible idea, always trust your feelings. We know this as far as like how that's part of our reactiveness with other adults too, is that sometimes we are kind of trying to be intellectual, but we're also having strong feelings about things. And so in that case, one of the things that we have to pay attention to, and this comes up with the idea of like, say, microaggressions, a real thing, a real problem, right? But how we react to somebody else doing something that is maybe an unintended, but painful because of the accumulative nature of it, thing, we have to also be considering the intent of people, right? Not entirely, right? Because we can still unintendedly do terrible things. But we need to be able to have this rational balance to what is sometimes a very highly emotional reaction to things. And so our young people are maybe feeling more than their thinking mind is being asked to add into that. And then the third terrible idea is this idea that life is a battle between good people and bad people. And because we've kind of been talking about like politics and that political division, right? That is like, I'm conservative. Those Democrats are bad people. They're doing bad things to our nation. For example, right? That idea of somebody is good and somebody is bad. And of course, humans and life is not reducible to binaries, even though everything in our world pushes us that direction. Okay. Oh, and then the children are fragile show up. We have just a couple minutes left, so I'm really quickly going to point you towards some of these possible actions for change. And then there's more information in the slideshow, and I'll tell you what I didn't talk about that's on this actions for change. Okay, so one of them is this anti-fragility, right? That category of we need to have anti-fragile mindsets that our children, our collective children, are anti-fragile. We can't put them on a 1910s playground where they could drop 20 feet, right? But we also maybe miss some of that adventure and danger, right? Not all of it, but reasonable adventure and danger. So a couple things. One is, of course, and we know this, and I haven't talked about it, but the social media for our young ladies is absolutely connected. The research right now that I've seen does not show a causal relationship, but there's definitely a correlated relationship. So simply taking out the social media might not make a change in and of itself, but it's a piece of it. 2 hours a day on social media is more than enough. And of course that changes developmentally, right? So this is targeted probably to like one of our like high school level adolescents, not to our younger students. Keeping that access to social media happening as late as possible. There's certainly been correlations again with like getting on Facebook earlier, getting on the Snapchat, whatever it is, the current thing. And then finally, there's a great website, letgrow.org, which was started by a parent who also wrote the book on free range parenting, which does not mean we want a free for all of our kids. We need to protect them, of course, but we also need to push them. And then a little bit of information about the seriousness of play. And that's specifically kind of that unsupervised play where kids have to kind of work things out with each other, knowing that bullying exists, right? So we have to kind of have that dynamic tension between what we don't want to do. And I know, Christy, I'm like just almost there. So then our feelings and emotions are balanced by critical thinking. This is the part that comes up later in the slides. I have a couple links for this. And as a former English teacher, I have a lot of thoughts on argument and dialogue and rhetoric, and how that connects to some of our ideas about how do we talk and listen with each other. And then stepping away from binary thinking, because binary thinking is hugely, hugely problematic for all of us, but especially for our youngest folks who don't know other ways of thinking about the world. And that's that thinking about our 5 moral foundations and teaching and seeking media and viewpoint diversity. And I'm going to stop. You have the slides. I'm going to just quickly jump to my end. So there's a couple more. Good. And I see a couple folks are in there. Thank you so much, guys, for your participation today. I really appreciate your thoughts and your patience with, you know, kind of figuring out how do I move this from an idea to something that I can practice. And you have my email. I would love to either, you know, talk, discuss, share some of the resources. And if you have things to share with me, I'm always looking for new ideas, but also new, like, how do we make this real in our classrooms and in our world? Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kirsten. We appreciate all your thoughtfulness on this topic and your willingness to have this discussion. Those of you that are attending the rest of the day, this is your lunch break. So you have from now until 11:45. And you can always go back into your conference schedule, check out your session number 3 that will have your new Zoom link, and you are good to go. So enjoy your lunch.